Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on weird and true mysterious stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Case file number 1407, written by BigSeth, The Drive Beyond Time and Space. I was driving home from Omaha last October. While I was in Phoenix, on one of my night drives back, I was barreling down the empty freeway and I see hazards up in front of me, so I decided to slow down and get over. And the car behind me would not slow down. I looked at my dash and the numbers and letters got all funky and looked like a completely different language, then immediately changed back. I looked back at the road, and the car with the hazards swerved out of the lane it was in like it was in motion. Next thing I know, I'm barreling at a car with no lights or hazards in the middle of the night. I knew I felt my steering wheel jerk hard right, and then hard left just enough to get me in the next lane, and then straighten me out. I have this weird passive belief in the quantum death theory, so I believe that iteration of me did die that night, but I moved on to the next version of me that didn't make that mistake, and I was viewing the same action over and over, and the dash acting funny was all those versions of reality overlapping for a split second. Or it was my dead grandma, who had road rage, watching out for me. Case notes for file 1407. The Drive Beyond Time and Space. So the important detail from this story is how the numbers and letters seem to coalesce together on the dashboard, as if your mind was unable to process reality because as you say, it was all discombobulated, or rather joined together. Quantum immortality is a seamless event though, minus sometimes being stuck in a limbo universe. This is the first time hearing about this kind of discombobulation event, mixed in with quantum immortality. Maybe it was something else entirely, but what else could it be? Perhaps a case of a guardian angel directly interfering, and somehow, by possessing you, your conscious mind wasn't able to understand what was going on. I'm just trying to make it make sense as how the information that you're reading didn't fit. Case file number 1408, written by Bonita248, The Mcdonald's Mandela Mystery. I know people that have seemingly died and switched over to a parallel universe. They remember their death or remember being in a situation where they could have died but yet lived and noticed things a bit different than before. However, I did not die from my recollection, nor did I come close to death. But I feel like something strange is definitely going on, and I have no clue as to what. To begin, I am a long-term worker at McDonald's. I work full-time and all the time. Anyways, in the beginning of summer, we started to sell a frappe-flavored beverage called Cookies and Cream. Now, before we actually start to sell something new, our restaurant gets flyers and pocket keepers explaining the new product. So I studied the pocket keeper, and it definitely said Cookies and Cream Frappe. The drink was made with small Oreo pieces, so I thought to myself, why don't they just call it an Oreo Frappe? I can remember when it was finally time to sell it. Now they put the button in order for us to ring this new drink up, and the button also said Cookies and Cream, being the flavor. So when customers would order it and say Oreo Frappe, I would be petty and say, you mean cookie and cream? After a while, everyone was saying Oreo Frappe, so I started saying it also. However, now the drink is discontinued, and here's the strange part. The other day I was thinking of the drink and said to someone, I remember when that Cookie and Cream Frappe came out, and everyone was calling it an Oreo Frappe. I laughed a little, and the person I was talking to said it was an Oreo Frappe. So I go on into my little speech about how I knew it was made out of Oreos, but was called a Cookie and Cream Frappe. However, no one remembers this. I even went to prove it on the register because even though we don't sell it anymore, it will still have the flavor but blanked out. To my surprise, when I looked, the button now says Oreo? What the freak? I don't know when it changed or how it changed, but I know it did not always say that. However, no one remembers the original name, and I cannot even prove it because all the flyers and pocket keepers are nowhere to be found. Such a simple and non-important glitch, but I definitely know that something isn't right. Case notes of file 1408. The McDonald's Mandela Mystery. That is usually the telltale sign of quantum immortality, when a small detail differs from what you expect. Is this always the case for the Mandela effect, or can details from within a universe itself retroactively change? So maybe it's not always the case that we're moving universes. Maybe there is actually corrections happening, and only some people are able to perceive it. The latter is much more disturbing, in my view. Bonus file written by Fabrice 1989. The day the cemetery held us captive. When I was in Ecuador, I was about 8 years old when we went to the cemetery to visit my aunt, who recently passed away. This must have been around 2 weeks after she was buried. It was my uncle, my mother, my grandma, my cousin, and I. This cemetery was huge, and it had sections for the people buried in the ground close to the entrance, but the ones buried in the walls were way deep inside. A good 10 minutes walking to reach the first building, since the cars were not allowed inside. There was only one way in. The front gate had 2 security guards. Anyways, when we finally reached the building, we saw an old woman leave the building. She was hunched over, walked really slow, and didn't acknowledge my mom and uncle when they said hello and excuse me. We didn't think much of it. She was probably mourning and upset, so we left it alone. We went to the 3rd floor where my aunt was. We prayed and cried, etc. Then we decided to leave. My grandma said she couldn't stop shaking, that she felt like she was freezing. Now keep in mind, this was around June in Ecuador. It was hot, even if you wore shorts and a tank top. We were burning and sweating in there, while my grandma was freezing. When we finally got downstairs, we noticed that the door was locked and had a chain with a combination lock. My uncle and mom tried to scream for help so somebody would come and unlock it. Their immediate thought was that the cemetery was closing and they didn't realize we were still inside. But we never saw anybody on our way besides that woman. The adults didn't have cell phones because I don't think they were around, or if they were, they probably weren't that common or too expensive. So calling for help was not an option. My uncle tried hitting the railings and windows to make as much noise as possible, but there was no way the guards all the way to the front would hear us. Like I mentioned above, it was a good 10-minute walk to our location. We were there for a good hour. My cousin and I are obviously scared and crying. It's getting dark and the heat is just too much. Then my grandma just gets up and walks away. My mother and uncle check up on her, but she ignores us. We follow her to the door. She grabs the chain and combination lock, stares at it for a few seconds, and then she unlocks it. At this point, my mother and uncle are in complete shock. My grandma still refuses to speak or acknowledge us. My cousin and I are laughing and trying to make fun of each other for crying, pretending we weren't walking around in pea-covered pants. So we walked all the way to the front gate and informed the guards that we were trapped inside and somebody locked us in. The guards assured us that we were the only people inside and that nobody else had left. They followed us to the building, but the chain and combination lock were gone. That's what I remember. Until I brought it up to my mother when I was older and I questioned her about it. Because I wasn't sure if it was a stupid memory my little brain made up, and I was believing it to be true all these years, but she confirmed it was real. She also mentioned that my grandma was questioned about the event, but she said she didn't remember any of it. Apparently, this was what was discussed between my grandma, mom, and uncle. My grandma had no memory of anything that happened after we finished praying and crying at my aunt's coffin. She also doesn't remember opening the lock chain and helping us escape. It's totally blank. Case notes for the bonus file. The day the cemetery held us captive. So I think the act of being locked in was meant as a prank, probably from rowdy teenagers in the area that just snuck in. By the way, never heard of cemetery with guards. That's actually rather respectful in my opinion. Outside of the Veterans Memorial, there's always an armed guard there, but otherwise if it's just normal people. But I do think the dead should be honored in that way, at least in memory. Even if most of them aren't around anymore, in spirit. But to escape, it sounds like your grandma was temporarily possessed by a spirit in that area. There are a few around, I imagine. Though it's unclear how they would have known the combination to the lock. That is interesting, so it's only part of the puzzle. Now time for the quote of the day. Books to the ceiling, books to the sky. My pile of books is a mile high. How I love them, how I need them. I'll have a long beard by the time I read them. Arnold Lobel. You know how I've painted the picture of having a cabin in the woods, a crackling fire in the winter? That's all great, and that's the dream. But also having a bunch of books, but real books, not just on, that you read digitally. They have to be physical books. Just the smell of the paper alone sends you back in the past, and it's a wild ride. There's nothing like it. If you haven't been reading hardcover books, like with real pages in it, I recommend it. Even if it's just fantasy. You don't have to do it in a way to always be stressing your mind out or anything, like self-help books or knowledge-based books. Those are good too, but if you just want to have a good time and relax, it's great. Actually, if you struggle to go to bed, the best advice is to, maybe an hour or two before going to bed, before you want to go to bed, just drop all the digital devices and read. That really does the trick. It calms your mind down. Unless it's the most intense book ever written. Maybe pick something a bit more mellow. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell. Kinetic Symphony signing off.